Hello, my name is Todd Lamley, and welcome to Firepower and Firepower Threat Defense. This is the introduction part 2, where we're going to talk about Firepower and Firepower Threat Defense packet flow, and we're going to start with the Firepower Threat Defense packet flow. First off, my name is Todd Lamley, if you didn't watch the first part, and I'm going to be your host through this whole course. Email, LinkedIn, Twitter, and website information is below. So first off, in the snort engine processing, the Lena, right, is our ASA code. So this is my ingress, this is my egress ASA code, and then we've got our snort engine. Now, one of the things that I mentioned when I was doing in part 1, if you saw that, if not, fine, but in the snort engine here, anything that happens here, if we did logging, would be sent to the FMC for processing so we can do network analysis. But what about down here? That's right, this is not sent to the FMC, at least not yet, not in the codes I've seen. So we have to use something called, on our FTD, a platform setting. And I'm bringing this up again because it's so important to the customers, my customers. We have to see what's going on. For example, what do we have in here? Well, you're going to have your VPN, you're going to have your NAT, and so on, and we're going to have our layer 3, 4 access list, and again, that'll be shown in the next drawing on the next page. However, what happens if we have a problem with VPN? What happens if we have a problem with NAT? We're not going to see it in our FMC, and by the way, it's the only place we can configure it. So we will do a troubleshooting section that focuses on this. I know I'm bringing that up. It's just that it's so important to my customers to be able to see that information. We could do show logging, just like the ASA from our FTD prompt, and we'll see this. Show log. We'll see this. I'll go through all this. But the snort engine here, we're looking at security intelligence, white and blacklists of IPs, and also that's layer 3. We also have layer 7 security intelligence. URL and DNS, IPS, AMP, URL filtering, malware. This is all part of the snort engine. It's not just IPS in itself. It's all of this. The packet gets a snort verdict and gives that to the Lena engine, right, to drop or be forwarded. So let's take a look now. This drawing that I spent a long time doing, the FTD packet flow. All right, so first we have to understand the packet flow for an FTD device is so important because we won't be able to troubleshoot. We're not going to really be able to create true policy, and we won't. And by knowing my detection process, we will understand that this will affect how I analyze the data and how I tune our security appliances and the policies. So we want to optimize detection, and this becomes easier when you understand the path and the flow, right? So notice in here, when we come in, here's my Lena process. Now this is a little bit more detailed, isn't it? So we have our ingress, we have, if it's an existing connection, right, we're going to skip the pre-filter layer through 3, 4 ACL, but not necessarily the snort process. Here, as I mentioned earlier, is my VPN NAT and my decryption, and then the first thing we hit is a policy, an FTD policy, not a firepower policy, meaning no appliance, no ASA with firepower. This is an FTD policy only, and there's just a few of those. And basically, this pre-filter allows us to drop traffic there. It allows us to send to network analysis, which is the default, and I'll come back to that. But most importantly, it allows us to fast path traffic right to the egress. That's awesome. That is a really great feature. I use this at a customer that had custom applications going between zones, and I was able to fast path that so we didn't have to go through the snort process. It wasn't going to the the outside zone or anything like that. They had multiple inside zones, and so that was a great use of fast path. Now, so again, we can block here. We're going to definitely drop traffic, but one of the things it says, hey, we can send this on to network analysis. Well, obviously, that's the default. So why do we have that in there? It's a good question. So, and I'll talk about this when we get to the pre-filter, but if you're migrating an ASA to FTD, you're going to, and highly recommended, that you take all of your rules, your ACL rules, and put them in the pre-filter, not here. So you have the option to put them up here into the main policy up here. But we're not going to do that. You can do that, but I don't recommend it. put in the pre-filter. Then you have to go through each and every rule. Yes, I had a customer with 10,000 rules. Took 3 months to get through. I'm not making that up. It was awesome, though, when we get to the end. Felt good. But we had to go through every rule and say, network analysis, block, or fast path. Most of it was network analysis. And then eventually a lot of that gets moved into the ACP. But if you're migrating and you have a huge enterprise, that's something you have to keep in mind. Now, this right here is interesting. Layer 3, 4 ACL. What the heck is that? Right? It sounds like a lot what we had in our ASA, but it's not. It's actually cache rules from the access control policy up here. Layer 3, 4 rules down here. We'll see that with show run. We'll see those cache rules in there because we need to make some determination 3, 4 before we go through the snort process. Now, the next thing we're going to do is take the packet and copy it into memory, and we're going to get that memory location. And we're going to send that memory location to all the different policies up here in the snort process. This way, we don't keep moving the packet around, right? We just give it its memory location, and the policies will go to that packet in that memory location. Very efficient way to do this. So here's my layer 3, 4 security intelligence. This is my first layer of defense, right? We're going to drop a lot of traffic here. I spent a good amount of time on security intelligence. We handle that right when we get into our access control policy because, again, that's one of the things that are configured in the access control policy. It's actually configured within objects, but implemented through the ACP, right? So we also have a layer 7 security intelligence. That's my URL and DNS. So basically, guys, as this comes through here, the snort verdict on the packet is handled then by the Lena, right? The snort process doesn't drop anything. It just marks it to be dropped or marks it to be passed. So remember that the snort process is a big picture here. Security intelligence, IPS, AMP, URL, and you've got file policy, right, which is part of your malware, your IPS. Network discovery is passive, right? This is a passive. Now, we could do an active scan on this, use an Nmap or something like that. But for the most part, our network discovery we're going to use by default is passive. I've gone out to customers that didn't turn on because they were afraid to bring down the network, and I get it. I've gone to a lot of places in financials that I work with where you bring down the network, fired. Period. No second chances, right? So they don't turn anything on. But I tell you, the network discovery policy can't hurt anything. We're just gathering information that comes through. One of the things, we do have quality of service here. We have quality, but hold on, we're just marking the data. It's actually enforced down here on the egress Lena process. So, and again, this really, and we'll definitely cover this, interface marking, interface policing is what all this is. So you don't want to take and get rid of like your QoS on your switches for your phones or anything. That's not what this is about. This is about interface policing, and it absolutely works. I show you this. But you have to understand its limitations, right? So in this case here, we're going to get through all this, make a determination on what we're going to do with that. So we're going to go through this process step by step. Every time we go through a policy, we're going to be in there, where are we, right? Understanding how to log the Lena process. How do we log the snort process? And most effectively, how do we efficiently tune our snort process, our policies? I'm going to talk to you about one more thing, and this is basically just the packet flow of firepower. So here's my FMC. Now this is a hardware, but we can do a virtual FMC, right? Which, if you go right from this video into the next one, that's what we're going to be configuring, right? But why would I have a hardware one? That's a really good question. They're very expensive. You got the 1,000, the 2,500, and the 4,500. Well, first off, this guy can only supposedly do 25 devices, which you mean when Cisco tells you that, you cut it in half. 12 to 16 devices running high availability. We can bring those in there, can manage that. Right? Now, remember, if we get a snort event, if we have a snort event, so here's ASA with firepower, they get a snort event, the packets of that event are transferred to the FMC. And you'll see that in one of these first videos. When we bring our devices into the FMC, it's the transfer packets is enabled by default. So we're going to send those packets for network analysis. Now, if you have a virtual FMC and 20 devices, you might be going a little slow doing something like that. So we can turn that transfer packets off. And, if you get more than 20 devices or less, you may end up having to go hardware just because you have enough devices where you're pushing policy, you're getting network analysis, correlation of events, you're getting snort event packets, right? Could be a lot of data. It depends. So in this case here, as we hopefully understand, the FMC is going to push policy. So we push out our policy. And if you watch the first introduction, you saw that the ACP, the main policy, is access control policy. And inside that is 7 other policies that we push out together. So in this case here, we're going to push those out, and it could be rather large at times and could take some time, 5, maybe even 10 minutes, depending on your device, maybe less. Will it drop data? Well, typically not, but we'll test that. The way that you test that is you ping through the device, right? You're going to ping through your FTD box, and you're going to push policy. And you're going to see if you drop packets or how many that you drop, or if you drop a TCP session. It's unlikely, especially if you have a higher end box, but on 5506 it's completely possible. So in this case here, the network analysis is going to come back to, the network analysis is going to come back to the FMC. And now we can do our correlation events and so on. Now, one thing I want to talk about though is, let's say that we have a file policy. And inside that policy, we say check all files or PDFs or a particular file for malware. I like to choose all files. The reason why we can do that is because the initial configuration can be just checking the SHA of the file, right? So if packets come in and they match the file policy, then we're going to take those and defragment them, build the file, and calculate the SHA. We're going to send that SHA, in this example, up to the FMC. It's very important to understand the devices do not talk to the AMP cloud directly. Now, if you have endpoint for AMP, those talk to the AMP cloud directly. That's kind of nice. That's why you have it. It's very expensive, but it's a nice thing to have internally in your network. But if I have malware protection here with a file policy, I'm going to send that SHA up. If the FMC doesn't have the disposition, probably not, it's going to send it to the AMP cloud. The AMP cloud's going to come back with unknown or clean or malware, and it's going to give that disposition to the FMC. Now, if it's malware, it's going to store 1 hour, that disposition. If it's clean, we're going to store it 4 hours. And that disposition to FMC, that makes it quick, that makes it faster. Now, during this time, let's say here's the host that file is being transferred to. During that time, the packets are being sent to the device, all but the last packet. So the device holds on to it until the FMC tells it to either drop the last packet, that way the malware obviously would never execute, or to let the packet through. It's a very efficient way to do that. Now, hold on. There's one other thing we can do here is we can configure this, and I usually don't configure this at my customers, but we can configure it so we send the file, right? We're going to send the file to Talos. Used to be called Vulnerability Research Team, and so I still have that there. So we can send that now. Most devices, for us that don't have a 4100 with a service level agreement SLA licensing, we can only send 100 files a day to the AMP cloud per device. That being said, most of my customers would use that in a few seconds, sometimes a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or something like that. Now you could be very specific and say only send up PDFs, something like that. But you would still probably run out. So I don't turn that on. What I usually do is have them check them all for SHA, and if it comes back, we can send it up by hand to Talos, right? Manually do it. But you have that option. All right, so we can check for malware with the FMC. If you can get a hardware FMC, you're going to have better response times, better pushing out your policies, better network analysis. But most of us end up with a virtual FMC. And unless you have an enterprise level agreement, ELA, licensing, which, by the way, you can send 3,000 files a day to Talos if you have that. So, but for the rest of us, we're only sending 100 files a day.